in a world where everyone uses a mineral called quartz to create magic. Rygart and his brother are the only ones who can't. They are what society looks down on as an un-sorcerer, someone who can't use magic. Bullied, beaten up, and too poor to afford it. Rygart eventually dropped out of the magic military school he was attending, despite outclassing the other kids. He is now a 25-year-old farmer, having inherited the farmland from his father, who sold all the magic equipment they had to teach them how to survive without powers. However, his father died a year ago, and now Rygart is living a modest life with his younger brother, Rygart. But things suddenly change for Rygart when one day, he gets summoned to the capital by the current king of Krishna, Hodder. There, Rygart reunites with Queen Sigyn, his school friend and crush. Despite being married to the king, she's secretly in love with our boy, and friend-zones her husband hard. She is loyal boys. Rygart heads to the palace, where he reunites with Hodder, his best friend, and one-fourth of their old friend group, the Troublesome Quartet. Their joyful reunion turns somber when Rygart asks about Zess, the last member of their group. A month ago, someone staged a coup in Assam, a nation that lies north of the Krishna Kingdom. The Athens Commonwealth and the Empire of Orlando staged military interventions, which resulted in Athens winning and taking over Assam. And Assam's capture means that Krishnan is now the next target for expansion. Hodder explains that the matter is currently hidden from the public, but Krishnan and Athenian forces are already fighting at the border. A small enemy platoon is currently inside their land, led by none other than their old friend Zess and his mecha golem thingy. Rygart thinks it's absurd that Zess is at the front lines as he was always known to be against war. After getting all the information, Rygart decides to escape to the mountains with his brother before the kingdom becomes a battlefield. But Hodder stops him, asking for his help, despite his friend being a magicless un-sorcerer who can't use any of their weapons. Athens proposed a peace treaty to end the conflict, under the condition that Krishna would surrender all its territories and have the royal family executed. After hearing that the royal family will be killed, Rygart changes his mind. The treaty means he will lose his best friend and the girl he's in love with, and he can't accept that. Hodder leads him into a mine where they recently discovered an ancient technology from a forgotten civilization. A 1,000-year-old crystallized golem was found, and Hodder wants his help to investigate the mech. But they're immediately put to the test as the enemy launches a surprise attack on them. Rygart enters the crystallized golem to figure out the controls. After accidentally touching it, the machine immediately registers him as a pilot. But it's programmed in a foreign language, so he can't understand what's on the screen. Rygart decides to go with his instincts and bursts high into the sky. The crystal surrounding the golem shatters, revealing a black golem that nobody has seen before. Rygart lands exactly at the enemy's pressure gun, but he's still trying to make sense of the controls. Just when the enemy fires at him, Rygart steps on the gas, and his golem launches itself toward the enemy, pinning it to the canyon walls. He doesn't mean to attack and hopes he didn't hurt the enemy pilot. They are immediately met with the Athenian counterattack. The enemy captain knocks Rygart out. Rygart recovers and hears Zess and Hodder talking, and decides to apprehend Zess, but gets knocked down again. Fortunately, Balder, a general of the Krishna military, arrives with reinforcements, forcing Zess and his squad to retreat. Sigyn immediately rushes to Rygart to check if he's injured, but he reassures her that he's fine, and that the newly discovered golem works for him, despite him not being able to use magic. The next day, Rygart mobilizes to assist in the battle at the kingdom's northern gate. Sigyn thinks Zess is back at it, so he has no choice but to face him again. Zess immediately asks him how he's piloting the golem, and lectures him about how the war started and pins the neighboring empire of Orlando for starting it. He tells him that Krishna colluded with Orlando, and that makes them an enemy of Athens. Rygart retorts that Hodder doesn't have any ambition and isn't a threat. Zess agrees, knowing that Hodder doesn't really want the throne. He asks Rygart to talk Hodder into surrendering, but our hero points out the awful surrender conditions, which he can't agree with. But before they can talk further, Zess boards his golem and threatens to shoot Rygart on 5 counts. He tells Rygart that unless they surrender now, a ruthless general called Borkus will join the invasion, leading over 200 golems into the capital. But Rygart stands his ground. However, Zess fires at Rygart's golem, causing him to fall. He's forced to enter his golem and flee. When he covers enough ground, he hides from the enemies, but an enemy golem spots and attacks him. Rygart manages to avoid the projectiles, but the golem attacks him again, so he brings out his claymore to defend himself. The two pilots enter close combat as Rygart's mecha is unable to use guns, but he's barely managing to control the black golem. His imprecise and brash combat techniques allow him to overpower the enemy. He flees again but stops midway when the enemy stumbles. An ally pilot appears to save Rygart under Baldur's orders and fires at the downed enemy. Rygart stops him, saying there's no need to kill the enemy, but the pilot tells him they're in the middle of an operation. They can't have prisoners. The enemy seizes the chance and shoots the newcomer in the chest, killing the guy in one shot. Rygart snaps at seeing the murder. He charges at the enemy in a sudden burst of adrenaline and lobs his lance for a bullseye. He shouts at the enemy to surrender, but she decides it's not worth it anymore, and he witnesses the second death in the span of minutes. That night, Sigyn talks to him about what happened and tries to console him, but he leaves before she can finish. The next day, he visits the grave of the pilot that died because of his inaction. There, he meets the soldier's pregnant wife. Seeing this, Rygart feels even more guilty and remorseful over the soldier's utterly preventable death. Baldur appears before him, and Rygart starts making excuses about how the pilot is an idiot for dying. But Hodder knows that his friend isn't an emotionless prick and knows how much he values people and life. The general invites him to their next mission as Hodder wants to surrender, basically sending himself and Sigyn off to die. But the recent events were too much for Rygart, and he leaves. Hodder meets him and bids him goodbye until they meet once more. But they both know that they won't see each other again. As Rygart walks off, he remembers his father telling him that it's okay to run away when he thinks he's going to die. But he realizes that he doesn't want to do that, not this time. So he turns back and finally decides to help his best friend by joining the war.